for all those who are unable to be with us right now. Ben, go right ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you, Ed. And since we're a small group, you may see, but Dr. Hall has joined us, so thank you. So I'm glad you all could be here today. We are, engaging in our, as Ed said, our fourth parent forum this afternoon. I do want to just share a little bit of information as we get started, and then certainly we can open it up to questions, comments, etc. First of all, just want to start by thanking you all for your support of your students as well as our staff getting the year off to a start these first 5 days of school. So we appreciate your support and involvement. Our real focus these first handful of days has been to reestablish relationships with our staff and our students. Obviously we were out for a number of months, and I think the focus for our staff again has been to either reconnect if children were already familiar with their teachers and service providers, or for some students who moved to a new school or a new case manager came on board, they've been becoming acquainted with each other. So trying to make those connections, because that's really what the beginning of the school year is about. Obviously, we have the added challenge of the distance learning format, but the beginning of school is really, it's always about making those connections, reestablishing the relationships. Of course, this year we're also, helping students understand how to use Zoom, what the etiquette is, what are the expectations and the routines. So that's an added component of the start to this school year. Just a few updates related to some things that we've talked about in past forums. One is the distance learning plans. Those are the plans that case managers have developed to essentially interpret each student's IEP into a workable plan for the distance learning format. And most of the DLPs have been completed at this point. There are a few that are still in process, but those distance learning plans in the vast majority of cases should have been shared with you already. If you haven't received one, by all means, reach out to your child's case manager or to me. It is something that does not come from an MRH standard email address. It's through a Qualtrics system that SSD uses. So, be on the lookout for that if you haven't already received yours. We had talked previously about evaluations and the fact that evaluations were paused last spring. I'm pleased to let people know that this week, evaluations or reevaluations are restarting at various SSD sites around the county. So if your particular child was awaiting an evaluation, that process is getting into motion. We're starting with evals that are the most overdue, if you will, and then moving forward from there. So those are initial steps taking place. If we have evaluations for speech articulation, so like a student who maybe is having difficulty pronouncing a certain sound or sounds, those evaluations can now move forward through Zoom, because a speech eval is something that can happen virtually. So the good news is we have some initial steps to get the evaluations going again. We also have had some questions about the MRH intervention learning pod plan. Some of you may know that Vince Estrada presented to the board a couple meetings ago, and then at its recent meeting, the board did vote to continue to explore and kind of flesh out the plan. So I do want to give Vince a chance now to update on where we are with that and what next steps might be.
So as Ben mentioned, I basically took the lead on working with all our building administrators about this idea about possibly bringing students on campus during this tier 3 phase, during this virtual learning phase. There was a recognition that with a small group of our students that they might need a boost during this time. Obviously we went through this in the spring and we saw some of our students who weren't able to kind of engage with them. We are mindful that during this tier 3 phase, we won't be able to replace their educational experience by bringing them on campus. So that was an important distinction in the presentation. It's to supplement, possibly. We haven't worked out the details yet. We presented to the board this idea about limited one-on-one or small group visits by students on campus once a week, perhaps, for 90 minutes, for example. And the buildings were supportive and interested in that. The process would be, and we're not going to do it until like late September, but the process would be every building has kind of an intervention team that's tracking student engagement and tracking student needs to see if it's not working, if the things that we're trying virtually, in addition to just reaching out through emails and phone calls and porch visits and modifications to the virtual learning experience, if none of those things are working, then maybe we would consider having them on campus for just once a week or so to kind of get them recalibrated. Ben mentioned with some of our younger students the issue of technology. I've had a chance to work with some families on their front porches with the technology and Chromebooks and kindergarten students, and did recognize that for some of the kids, one of the barriers is really being able to navigate the technologies. And they're getting better at it, but there's still some learning curve there with getting on Zooms, how to use links, how to manage your email. They're 5 years old. It is challenging. So we recognize that even for some students, it might just be a simple matter of helping them kind of navigate the technologies to access the learning. So the next steps so the board did approve us taking the next step, which is to meet with the building administrators and kind of flesh out what that would look like. The building admins have already acknowledged that they'd like to try this. So my favorite phrase these days is the devil's in the details. We will use intervention teams to identify the priority group of students that we need to bring on campus, and we'll have to kind of work out the details of the dates and times and cohorts and how to do this safely. So more details to come. I'm going to meet with the building administrators in the next 5 days to kind of flesh out with them the details about how to bring students on campus in a limited way. I know that Youth in Need, which is one of our mental health partners, and they provide counseling to our students and families here. We're interested in doing some other sessions on campus, so they would also be covered by that. There is, I'll work with Ben and his staff about, if there's students that receive therapies and the telehealth is not working, and maybe we can bring them on campus for some limited support. So that's, more to come, but that's the update. So the board did give us a thumbs up to take the next step. We didn't intentionally flash out all the details because we wanted to pause it and to see if they wanted to support this idea, and they were in support. So phase 2 is putting some details to that plan. So if the presentation is available on board docs, I don't know if there's an easier way to get it, but it is available to the public, what we kind of laid out. So those are the updates I have about that.
Great. Thanks, Vince.
No problem.
A couple other things. Mrs. Gifford, again, as always, has been very helpful in sharing feedback that she's gotten from families. Some families have reached out to her about, the number of transitions or various other challenges that, families are experiencing. And I would just say, as you come up against, challenges or roadblocks, please reach out to your child's case manager or to me so that we can see what we can do to try and problem solve through those issues to the best of our ability. as some of you may know, you know, students who have a fair number of services, they do experience a number of transitions, and often transitions can be challenging. So if that's kind of the reality for your child, again, please reach out to us, and we can do what we can to try and work through those issues to make it a better experience for your child. That is, in essence, the updates that I wanted to share. So if folks have questions, I see there are some things in the chat. I don't know if those are comments or, okay, let's see here. Okay, so there is a question about the DLP. Is that a temporary stopgap, or is that considered an amendment per Form G? So what this family is asking is the state, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, has come out with a model Form G, and Form G basically addresses how students will receive an education when schools are closed for emergency type reasons. Currently, DESE, as we call them, Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, does not require Form G. So at this time, SSD isn't using that form, but the distance learning plan essentially contains those same elements that Form G would have. So the distance learning plan, at least at this time, serves the same function as Form G. But the distance learning plan is not considered an IEP amendment. The distance learning plan essentially is translating the information in the IEP around goals and services into a workable plan for this distance learning phase that we're in. I'm not sure if I answered all of that question. Oh, yes. Apparently, there have been some folks who received their DLP, but did not have an opportunity to provide input into that. So that's something I need to follow up with our case managers on, because the process is intended to be a collaborative process. So I will be following up with them regarding that. And if that particularly pertains to folks on this Zoom, please feel free to reach out with me, and I can be more specific with that particular case manager. Okay, so then there's a question about, it's kind of a two-part question. This person's child was supposed to be evaluated in the spring, but that didn't happen. And they haven't received any information about how that will move forward, if at all. And then the companion question was, what will occupational therapy services look like? Essentially, I would need, if I can have more specific information about which child we're talking about, I can follow up with you. And I will put my email address in the chat here. And if you wouldn't mind following up with me, then I can specifically look into where we are in the process with your particular child. As for OT services, those will be provided through telepractice. So, for example, if an IEP indicated that a child was supposed to receive 60 minutes of occupational therapy per week, then the occupational therapist would be, oh, I see. Okay, the follow-up question. the OT would be a new service in addition to the services that the child already receives. So that does change things a little bit. But the service, if the child is eligible for OT services, those would be provided by Julie Kirschman, our occupational therapist. And the amount of service in the Zoom or live environment should be comparable to the amount in the child's IEP. You know, what we're trying to do this fall is with those related services, things like speech therapy, language therapy, OT, PT, we are doing our best to match as close as we can, minute for minute, the services in the child's IEP in those areas. Let's see, there's a question, and Vince, I may need your help on this one. Has administration determined a tentative date to move forward with the once a week on campus? And then the follow-up or the additional question there is, how will students be evaluated to be included in the campus cohort? You're on mute, Vince.
So we have not identified a tentative date. I know that when we made the presentation, we talked about the earliest possible window would be the third week of school to give students and faculty a chance to get the virtual learning and distance learning off to a good start. But we should have some dates nailed down within the next week or so. And the criterion will be, so we'll look at, you know, there's intervention teams, there's building level teams that talk about the students all the time. And one of the things that, and that's even in, you know, regular in-person learning times, we always have data teams that look at all the students, not the students with 504s or with disabilities, but every student. And we identify students who are struggling and might need some additional supports. We're going to use that process to determine what students might need to come on campus. Students with disabilities, the additional layer might be assessing whether or not they're able to access and benefit from all the services and to see if there could be any additional benefit of them coming on the campus in a limited time. That's a little bit different. We'll have to work with Ben on his team on those kind of things, especially when on therapies, because they might not come on the radar. For example, like from the high school, for example, and I've been getting calls from their team already, they're looking for students that haven't engaged. These aren't students with disabilities, these students that just have not logged in, participated, not engaged, have no work done for the first week. Those are students we're worried about. Now, we're not going to bring them on campus right away, but we're going to try to reach out to them, go to their homes, knock on their doors, try some different strategies. And if they continue to struggle, we might bring them on campus to kind of give them a boost. So those are the kind of criteria we're going to be looking at. Students who are not benefiting and are falling behind in the virtual learning despite multiple interventions, and then we may bring them on campus. We recognize that bringing them on campus, even if it's just once a week, will not replace or maybe take care of all the challenges, but it could, we hope it to give them a boost, particularly if they're missing out on some therapies and some contact with staff. So that's the kind of theory behind it. So again, to go back to the question, the earliest we would start is the third week of school, so mid to late September, but more details to come. I hope that I have more information for you guys in the next week or so.
Thanks, Vince. So there's another question about whether or not the school could help facilitate off-campus neighborhood-based optional social groups. Mm-hmm. So the only concern I have there is, from a school standpoint, is we are not necessarily in a position to, you know, connect families in that would potentially inadvertently divulge a child's special education status. So I do have a concern about us being involved in that from a confidentiality, you know, FERPA kind of aspect. But we could potentially put some brain power into that to see if there's some way we could be of assistance. Because I know, you know, some families are very connected and have, you know, an existing social network, others not as much. And so I do understand that that would be a need. Okay, there's a question about some classes being, you know, too challenging for a particular student. I would say in those instances, we need to work with the case manager, classroom teacher to try and make the needed adjustments, whether it's providing different levels of work that's more appropriate, or modifying, you know, existing work. For sure, we need to have some conversation about that. You know, because if the work is too challenging, or you know, on the other hand, if it happened to be too simple, that's not serving our students the best that we can. I'm making a note of that, and I will follow up on that one with you. Thank you. Okay, so here's a follow-up to the previous question about neighborhood social groups. There's a suggestion about, you know, maybe asking for parents if they were interested in being a neighborhood team leader or something like that. You know, and that would potentially be something that that I could facilitate, sharing that out with a group email distribution list. So that's a good idea.
Ben, I will go ahead and take the next one.
Sure.
And that is the $1 million question, and I, as it relates to reentry and how is that determined. So the conversation that I present to the Board of Education started maybe a week, 2 weeks ago. And part of my concern is that I really didn't have that data, the tools necessary. And it's not just me, but all the regional superintendents. So for several weeks, my group, the regional superintendents, and then I'm in a work group with other health professionals. I meet with them every Thursday with a small group of superintendents, giving them feedback on what the superintendents need in order to do this very thing, to try and make that determination with their Board of Education. So two sets that we're going to use now, and all of this is being presented to the Board of Education. It's going to be public, so you can hear the conversation and the thinking around reentry and that determination. But it's a dashboard that was created through an organization, which is all of the superintendents through EdPlus. We're using that dashboard, and then also St. Louis County is been responsive in some of the requests of information that we need as well. So that's going to be a part of consideration. The board has not made any decision on a date. Right now, they're just getting familiar with the dashboard and the metrics that are going to be used, and other, you know, items, other considerations from St. Louis County, other information. So they had to determine really the MRH threshold for them for re-entry. So again, I strongly recommend sitting in on the board meeting. We are going to really begin that conversation and using those metrics Thursday. Like I can't remember, I've had so many meetings. I think it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago where it was brought out. Everyone was able to see the presentation of what the dashboard will look like. Now I'm bringing in the St. Louis County age group metrics, which is really important. So, and also the zip code data is the additional metric that we're going to be looking at as well. So that's forthcoming. So that's going to be something that we're talking about weekly. The information from the dashboard is presented to me 3 times a week. So the most recent information I'm going to be presenting to the Board of Education. So we're now at the beginning stages of working on that. And then tangentially, I'm having conversations with regional superintendents. I'm sure you all are listening to the news, like Rockwood is thinking about doing some reentry. Lindbergh already is with their youngest students, and Jennings has been in since July. So these things are being talked about at this point in time. So more to come.
Karen, there's a follow-up question about when is the board meeting and how will they know about and how will they join in the board meeting itself?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. And actually on that end of communications, we have Mr. Rich here because I don't ever see it. How do you publish that?
In several ways. So the district has a number of Facebook pages. There's one that is district-wide. It's easy to find. Just type in Maplewood Richmond Heights School District and you'll find the district Facebook page. And I post it as an event, not just a typical posting that people make, which keeps it pinned up to the very top of the page. So it's impossible to miss when you go to the Facebook page. I also share it over to the high school page. I share it to the middle school page. And I thought I was sending it to Kim Gifford's Parent Advisory Council page, but if I haven't been doing that, I apologize. I will start doing that. It is also prominently displayed on the mrhschools.net website. And in addition, every Monday, late morning or early afternoon, we send out a constant contact newsletter, and there's always a link to the board meetings in there as well. So I think probably for this group, the best thing for me to do is to remember to get it over to the Facebook Parent Advisory Council page, because I'm thinking that many of you are looking at that. So, all right, so the question was, when is the next meeting? It's the 17th, I believe, is that right? At 7 o'clock.
No.
Well, there's another meeting before then, but.
Yeah, so specifically to your question, I'm talking about that directly Thursday, related to the metrics. So, and we're going to talk about what the architects are doing with property planning. They go first and then I'll go second.
And that's 6:30, not 7 o'clock, 6:30 on Thursday.
Okay, thank you. There was another question, I think, from a person who may have come into the meeting just recently, asking if there's any movement forward on how in-person services might take place. And just to briefly reiterate, the board did vote to continue to pursue that option. Mr. Estrada is heading up that effort, and over the next week or so, he is, along with principals, myself, and others, working on what that plan might look like. And that would include determining which students might be invited to participate, when that would be, those kinds of things. There's a question about, or a comment for the tiered option. Where was the decision made that the entire school day be delivered over Zoom? The comment is that the special ed small Zoom classes have been amazing for her son, but the larger gen ed classes aren't working effectively. So I think, honestly, I don't know in terms of how the decision was made that, you know, in terms of, well, it would have been for this particular family, Dr. Hebenstreit and her leadership team talking about making more live Zoom opportunities available. So I think, you know, it would warrant a conversation with the classroom teacher, the case manager. You know, if there is an opportunity for some adult support, One thing that we're trying to become more familiar with and use more effectively are breakout rooms, which take that class size down to a much smaller environment. So that may be an option that could be considered, you know, when that's warranted. So I will make a note on that.
And so I'll take the next one, Ben.
Sure.
I think I'm in the right order. So
Yeah, please.
So let me clarify. Because of where I have been in conversations, I'm speaking about what I know right now. I am with my peers in the region and a little bit further out. So in our conversation with the health professionals in the smaller group, there is some conversation from St. Louis County folks, Department of Health, starting to track that very thing as it relates to independent schools as well. Apparently the things that we sometimes ask about, they say they're very heavy lifts that they want from us, which anyway, I don't want to say I don't care. I mean, I appreciate them listening to us, and they're trying to update it, and they've been updating the website with some other perspectives of looking at what's going on with transmission and so forth. So that is something that has been in conversation, but doesn't have a whole lot of shape. So when I say that, I'm talking about what I know. I'm talking to my peers. I'm talking to them weekly, at least once, that these are some of the future planning that they're considering. And then I'm keep going here. There's one further, and that is correct, that from the individuals, meaning superintendents that are thinking about transitioning back, it's with young students. And that is 100% of the folks talking. The youngest learners like ECC and elementary age students, maybe to like 5th grade. And again, not that there's solid plans, but there's conversation around that. And then keeping our teenage or older kids in all long distance learning where they are right now, where we currently are. So, you know, again, we're just at the beginning stages with the Board of Education. I have these tools, these metrics that we're now going to look at, and that's one of the things, you know, I have to present to them, like that's what folks are looking at, is the young cohorts, or blended where it would be A/B scheduling. So that's where we are right now with that.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. So we have a comment that sounds like breakout rooms aren't fully worked out yet in terms of how to make the most of those. Let's see. Okay. So there's a suggestion of using university students to possibly support. You know, I don't know if that's a possibility. It's something we could consider. We have at times had university student volunteers in the past when we've been in session. So that's something that we could consider. Okay. Here's a comment that someone does not believe Rockwood should be our model. You know, and I think maybe the spirit of that is we're smaller, we're in a different part of the county, you know, so I'm guessing that, you know, folks want MRH to do what's best for MRH, is what I'm guessing here. All right. Okay. So here's someone who you know, works for an independent school, and they've experienced success so far. So obviously, I mean, that's good. We don't wish people to have bad experiences. Let's see here. Okay. And here's just a comment about you know, some health factors related to the virus.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. It's a little conversation. So I just want to be clear. I'm not saying anyone is a model for us. I'm just letting everyone know that there's conversation. I don't know the details of what they're doing. I just know it was in the news recently. So please, I'm not implying that. We have to do what is best for MRH. Just like I said, there are thresholds that has to be discussed for what's best for MRH. So that's really what I'm trying to let everyone know and make you aware, that those thresholds and what's best for MRH has not been decided by the Board of Education, and that I'm beginning the process. And really that is what I want you all to understand, that there's going to be a process of reviewing the data, the dashboard that's been presented by the superintendent's group, and then also parts of the St. Louis County Health Department, the age group metrics, and then also the zip code information. So all of those things, kind of a portfolio approach to looking at COVID, the community transmission, in order to make those different decisions. So please do not think that that's what I'm trying to do, is follow after different groups, but within the context of the region, these things are happening. There's conversation about re-entry. So I apologize if I wasn't clear about that.
Thanks. Here is a request to revisit the question about small groups returning to campus, or young cohorts of students returning to campus, and if that is a possibility. Vince, do you want to kind of chime in on that one?
Sure. I wish I had more details for you guys, and we are working those out. So we drafted a tentative plan. The board gave us permission to take it to the next level, which is to put some details on it. I want to be really honest and transparent. It will not replace the virtual learning experience for our students, which we know in-person instruction is better. But it's hoped to be a supplement, something, you know, so that can help them kind of tie the week together. That's sort of the philosophy about it. So there is a possibility of us being able to do that with kind of targeted small group or one-on-one. We'll probably be pretty careful and conservative on the front end to make sure we do it well and safely. So it is a possibility. That's the question. So the answer is yes, it's definitely a possibility. And we're working out the details with building administrators now. And we have actually given some shape to it. It isn't in the kind of theoretical phase. We've done some work about this, but now we have to get into the detail parts. And the tricky part will be identifying dates and times, and how, you know, we're not trying to pick, you know, some students that come on campus and are not, but we don't want to pick winners and losers here, like, oh, you get to come, you don't. We don't want to get into those kind of things. We want to be mindful about it and try to identify students who we are tried other interventions virtually that have not been successful. That's kind of the general concept behind that. So there are more details to come for sure. And I think the question above that is, I'd like to see more than one day in school for SSD students. So I'll make a note of that when I talk to the building principals about that, Ms. Nichols. And by the way, I concur with Ms. Nichols' assessment of the breakout rooms. I was working with a family. We went to a breakout room and it was 5 kids staring at a screen because it's a new skill for them. Like when they're in class and they go into small groups, they know how to do that. But in Zoom, they're sort of like, how do I talk? And there was no one to prompt them. So I did get a chance to observe that. So that's part of our learning in the virtual learning world as well. And students are, I mean, the norm is students are supposed to be on video, otherwise they're not supposed to participate in class. So that is true.
And I'll take the next one. So the concrete criteria, what will determine, Yes, we are now looking at the metrics from the dashboard from the group called Ed Plus, which is the superintendent's group. And we're looking at age group metrics and zip code metrics. So those are things, but when looking at the information from the dashboard in particular, you know, it has to be determined what the board, like what their threshold is for re-entry. So there isn't anything anywhere that says this is, you know, the magic number. There is no magic number, but you can see, and it will be, that's why I encourage folks to go to the board meeting to see, okay, what are they discussing, so it is transparent and people can see what they are discussing and making that decision from. So that's what I'm making reference to. And then of course there needs to be a revisit of, okay, well, what would that look like? Let's say the youngest learners, what would that look like at ECC? What would that look like at the elementary school? So all of that is forthcoming and part of the expectation. And then also the Board of Education is planning on having a conversation around these metrics weekly. And so they've slated time on Fridays to do that. However, we won't start this Friday. It's going to be launched on Thursday. That's what we're going to do. So that's all, like, makes complete sense. And that's what they're working on right now, having conversation around that and making sure that it's really what we can support. And it's a lot of communication, of course, that has to be with families, it has to be with staff. And please, again, I want to emphasize that there isn't a date right now. We are at the beginning stages. This data that I'm talking about right now, they've seen it about 2 times now from 2 meetings. So it is very early on. So nothing is going to happen suddenly. To move to a tier would be a lot of work anyway to do that. So this is just the beginning stages. Again, you can zoom in on Thursday and you can hear their conversation and see the information that they're going to be reviewing and considering.
So we have a question about young students who are just sounds like are struggling, you know, in all environments, and what else can be done. I think the first step is a team meeting with the relevant staff and the parent to determine, you know, what are the specific challenges, what are the specific barriers, so that the team can start to think about those and problem solve and offer additional you know, intervention suggestions or supports. You know, I think, you know, none of us by ourselves can necessarily, you know, tackle multiple issues. So the important part is to stay in communication with, you know, your child's case manager, with me, other providers, so that we can start to problem solve, so we can develop a better experience for each child. I'm not seeing other questions at the moment, but here we go. So the follow-up to that question was, what happens when those avenues have been exhausted? Well, then we get back together again. We try to generate new intervention ideas. You know, that might, you know, depending on the thinking and the guidelines for which student, you know, what the guidelines end up being for which students are invited for some in-person intervention. You know, a student who is experiencing challenges across the board, you know, again, we haven't developed those guidelines, but I would think that might be a student who would be, you know, someone who would be invited in for some in-person intervention. You know, because we're wanting to, you know, support students who are struggling the most, if you will. Let's see. Is there any way for an aide to assist a student with transition from one class to another for those students unable to do so independently? That is a possibility. You know, the challenge, of course, is you can only be on one Zoom at a time. So, you know, at some point, one Zoom has to end. And of course, at that point, you know, an aide or a teacher would not be able to be present with the child virtually. So there would be that little gap where that would be, you know, a point where an adult in the home or an older sibling might need to support that transition a little bit. So there's a question about when SSD pushes into writing time, how does that look? Honestly, without knowing the specifics of that particular, you know, whether it's a, you know, that particular class and what the goal is, it would be hard for me to comment. But please, if you wouldn't mind following up with me via email, we can explore that further. Okay, so there's more clarification in terms of what writing might look like. So this parent is asking if they're pushing into a scheduled classroom writing time, would the provider be in the large Zoom setting? Yes, initially. That, again, that's an opportunity where we can explore the possibility of using breakout rooms. And, you know, we are learning about how to make multiple people co-hosts and use the technology. But it could be a situation where we could do a small breakout room. We try in general to make sure students are present. If their time is in the general ed classroom, we try to make sure they're present there for the teacher's lesson or mini lesson. And then, you know, support once we get to independent work time. But that's a generalization. And, you know, we can certainly, you know, figure out what would be the best use of that time. So that might be a topic for further discussion, you know, outside of this particular meeting. Okay. We'll wait a minute in case someone is actively typing into the chat.
Hey, Ben, just to clarify, it sounds like when you talk about the push, and that sounds like in the breakout room, the adult, the SSC staff person would join the students in the breakout room to help them with the lessons, correct?
Yes, sorry, I did not explicitly state that. Yeah,
because there have been some epic staring contests at some of the breakout rooms when there's not an adult there. So,
right.
So I'm make sure that's clear.
Good point. I was not clear now that you say that.
Yeah.
But yes, we would not. Our intent would not be to just put students into a breakout room and bet that they would necessarily perform better or different just because it was a breakout room. It would be with that staff over there.
Hey, Ed, is there a way to capture, these comments are excellent. They're great feedback for us. And I want to pass this on also to our building administrators. So as they begin to think about how to do anything on campus, I want them to kind of get a sense of what our families are thinking about with this. Is there a way to save these chat comments?
Absolutely. I do that each time.
That's what I thought. So thank you. Because I'm going to make sure I pass that on to our principals as well, so they can begin to think about this.
Well, because this session has lasted less than an hour, I may not need technical help to get the file size altered to fit on YouTube. So I should have this up very soon. Maybe tonight, I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments?
Speaking to the parents, do you guys have a sense of when you wanted to meet again, or when did you want to schedule another forum? This is helpful for us as we shape our programming. Do you guys have a sense of that? You can just drop it into the chat.
My thought is we should meet again when we have more information to discuss. So when we have information on, you know, when we might be able to go into the building, or what the criteria for that, or you know what I'm saying, something maybe answers some of the questions that are being asked today that we don't know.
Okay.
Some of the answers we'll never know, but yeah.
Did you catch that, Ben?
I didn't. My audio was very distorted.
Mine too. What I was able to glean, I think, is like, I know it's not Evan. I know it's Evan's mom, but is that as to me, as soon as we get some new information to share with regards to some of the questions that have been posed about on-campus learning and some additional things. I did hear Dana Glore, super funny. Tomorrow too soon. I saw some people crack a smile. I think our participation might be a little low if we go again tomorrow, Dana. But I think a couple of weeks sounds good, because I think we're going to have hopefully some updates for the group. You know, this is an evolving situation for all of us. So yeah, I think 2 weeks. How do you feel about that, Ben?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. I think, you know, as one parent said, you know, definitely as changes occur. So I think maybe we need to think about when there would be, you know, more information to share, as you said, about some of the questions that have come up today.
Yeah.
But I can certainly, you know, we can talk as an administrator group, and then I can be in touch with Mrs. Gifford to get her perspective, you know, a little bit more without the audio difficulty that I just experienced. Yeah, so then we'll get something scheduled.
Yeah, because it sounds like there'll be 3 meetings between now and the next time we meet. There's a parent advisory council meeting tomorrow night. There's a couple board meetings this Thursday and one on the 17th. And then I want to try to meet with the principals too. There was an additional question that came in, Ben, just now.
Yeah, some concern about teachers insisting that kids share their video, especially if the student is having, you know, kind of a dysregulated moment. I would say that for the student's dignity and privacy, if that's happening, again, you know, I don't know the specifics of the situation, but I would think it would be appropriate to turn the video off for a time. You know, that's something that I think most staff are encouraging students to have video on, but we also understand, you know, there are factors, whether it's, you know, some dysregulation or some anxiety about being on video, or you know, some uncertainty about people seeing into your home, those kinds of things. We do want to try and respect students' wishes, you know, especially if they're you know, having a moment, or and then if not, if they're still engaged, we can work with that. Of course, you know, teachers, as all of us as people, thrive on being able to read body language and facial expressions. So I think it's often helpful to have the video on because we gain information about each other's understanding and intent and meaning through the nonverbals. But we also need to, you know, acknowledge when there are other factors at play. And I see that teachers are calling kids out by name. So I will look into that and with the appropriate staff and administrator, you know, and
yeah.
See what we can do about that.
Yep.
All right. Mrs. Gifford has a good reminder, one that I would echo. She's encouraging all parents to speak up if you're having problems and be your child's advocate. You know, we welcome that. If things aren't going well, especially if we don't even realize they're not going well, your feedback gives us an opportunity to improve and try to make your child's education a better experience for them and for you all, because we know you've been put in the position of now being our co-teachers at times, if you will. So we appreciate the feedback, even if it's a criticism, that's okay. That again, that's how we know that we need to work with you and work better.
And I just want to say, just to emphasize, I really do appreciate like the text box is extremely helpful. And I look forward to continuing this dialogue with everyone because it really helps us get a better idea of what's going on. It just means a lot. I tell you this after each meeting, but it's truthful. So thank you so much for coming and letting us know. You all know we've never done this before, so we have to do it together and try and figure this out. So all of this is critical for us so we can do a better job at what we're doing. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to shut her down so we can all rejoin our families. Have a great evening.
Thank you all.
See you guys.